That's funny. Rochelle, your competition, can you see the chat? She may not be able to hear me.
That's me.
That's cute.
Is that okay that I'm here then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
still supposed to be hybrid where
Okay.
you can come in or do Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wait a couple minutes for Austin to put some audio on for us. I don't know if anybody can hear me.
Here, one sec. It'll be a lot louder in just a second. Yeah.
I don't think about that part of it.
Very good. We'll see that open.
Is that better? Can you guys hear me now?
And then that. How about that?
Better?
Microphone. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
I'm seeing Austin nodding his head. Is it louder or quieter?
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'll go check.
Good.
We should be good.
Good. Okay. We'll wait for Masha to come back and then I will get started. Does anybody have questions right now that they want to go over before we get started? Nothing right now. Okay. So I have a packet that I will have in my office if anybody wants to pick it up. I also have everything digitally and I'm going to show it all. I'll share my screen. I think it's this one. Yes. Not that one, not that one. Okay. Can you guys all see listing procedures up there? Hopefully.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. Okay. So we'll get started and actually shouldn't be listing procedures. Let me fix that. It's supposed to be buyer. I'm stuck on last week. In here. Fix that. The mouse in here works really weird. Sale. Okay. That's better.
Hey, Chantel, could you zoom in a tiny bit on that one for us, please?
Yes. This one that does it.
I usually want to say, I can move them on and closer.
Figure out which one zooms.
If you go to the top right, oh, there you
Smaller.
go. It looks like it's working. You got it.
Just going the wrong way. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi. How are you guys? Good. Good. Let me get you one of these fun packets. Thank you. Okay. There, just type that up actually today.
Yes.
New part.
Great.
Okay, so we'll get started with sale procedures. This, again, everything's digitally. I can send everything to you. It's also in my office if you want to pick up one of these packets. Day one, you're going to have already shown property. You're probably going to be standing in the house when they say, this is the one, I want to write it up. It's totally a feeling usually. So usually while you're in the house, you are going to talk about the terms of the offer with your clients. If it's a brand new client and you haven't even had a chance to talk to them about their pre-approval, that should be your first conversation. Are they pre-approved? If you've been working with them for a while, you probably have already had that conversation about whether or not they're pre-approved and hopefully reached out to their lender, found out their loan program, their closing costs. You do want to ask the people if they want their closing costs paid, and they'll look at you funny most of the time and say, I don't know what you're talking about. The lender will know, so call the lender. They don't understand when they're brand new home buyers, and even if they've bought a home before, they still don't always understand what that means. It is worded that the closing costs are being paid by the seller, but the way that I view it is they're really financing it into the loan, because if they weren't asking for closing costs, they would pull the loan amount down, if that makes sense. But truly the seller is paying the closing costs, because you'll see it on the HUD statement. They are actually paying it. But if they weren't paying, again, say it's a $400,000 house and you offer 410 and 10,000 of closing costs, your net offer is 400. So sellers legitimately paying the closing costs, but the other version of it is the buyers financing them in. That's kind of how that works. That's how I explain it to people. So pretend we're standing in the house, discuss the terms of the offer. You're really excited, how much you want to pay for the house. Talk about in this market right now, especially anything under $1 million, well, even over $1 million is getting multiple offers right now. So you have to be really competitive. It is so frustrating. I did type up this ideas for competitive offers, which we'll get to in a minute, just so you can have some ideas for what will help you in a multiple offer situation. Let them know what the market looks like. They probably already have a pretty good sense of it, hopefully, but not everybody does. I'm running across people who have no idea that the market is as crazy as it is. Talk about the price, what they're willing to pay. We'll talk about escalation clauses, but you can do an escalation clause. They're my favorite. Not every offer will accept them though. So you do want to ask the listing agent whether or not they're accepting escalation clauses, and they might accept it up front, but then once they get 10 offers, they may take that version out and you have to revise your offer. So closing date is really important, both for the seller and the buyer.
What's an escalation clause?
Escalation clause is we'll go back to 400,000, a $400,000 house, it's going to have 10 or 15 offers on it. So you talk to your buyers about what's the most amount you would pay for, what's your drop dead point on this house? Is it 450 or 475? So you write the offer at 400,000 with an escalation clause that goes up to their maximum amount. We'll say 450 is their maximum amount. And then they have increments up to that point. So we'll say $3,000 increment. The escalation clause will then say that the buyer will pay up to or pay $3,000 over the highest other offer, bona fide offer, up to $450,000. So if the other highest offer is 440, you're going to pay 443. That makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. And we do have an addendum for that. You do kind of take into account closing costs and things like that. If other offers are paying closing costs, then the net, it might say 400,000, but the net's really 430. So you're going to pay 433 if that were the case, if that makes sense. Though that can get a little bit hard for people to understand. So we can go over that when you have an offer too. Closing date's really important. The seller might want a long closing date or a short closing date. So do call the other agent ahead of time and just say, what kind of closing date is your seller looking at? Also call the lender and find out what they need for a timeline. Each type of loan is different in how long they take to get closed. Conventional can be really fast. Cash is going to be super fast. If they have cash, you could close it in a week or two, potentially. You do want to allow for inspections and things, but earnest money, also another thing that a first-time home buyer is not even going to know that they have to do. So try to have that conversation with them before they get to the point where they want to write an offer. It's usually 1% of the sale price or the asking price. It doesn't have to be exact. So if you're offering 420, you don't have to do 4,200. You could just do 4,000. That's fine. Again, depending on the earnest money or the type of loan, you may not be doing a whole 1% for earnest money. You might only be doing $1,000 for a VA loan or USDA. They're both true zero down loans. You get that money, the buyer gets that money back at closing. So it typically is a lower amount. But in the market that we're in right now, if you try to do 1,000, you are probably not going to get the offer. There's just not enough skin in the game when you're up against 5 or 10 other offers. Closing costs, you do want to talk to them about that, just like I mentioned. Down payment also, ask them what their down payment is going to be. Down payment is part of the earnest money. So when you write the offer, if it's a $400,000 home, they're putting 20% down, it's $80,000 total. And if they're putting $5,000 of earnest money down, then the remaining down payment will be $75,000. That makes sense. And we'll go over all that when we write offers too. So don't worry about not remembering anything in this whole transaction thing today. I do go through this with you one-on-one too. Some buyers are going to ask for a CMA. Not all of them will. I never offer to do it. You really get a pretty good feeling for whether it's a good market value or not when you're out looking at homes, but there are some buyers who want that CMA. They want to know. It almost doesn't matter right now in the market that we're in. You can give them a CMA. It's going to say the value is 420 and you know the house is going to sell for 480. There's no point to a CMA right now, aside to let them know that they are overpaying for the house because of the market conditions. So first thing that you want to do too is pull tax information. I do have a tax assessment in here on a property that I'm kind of using as an example. I'm going to I'll pull it up on here. So you actually won't even have to scroll through all that paperwork if you don't want to. This property, so we'll pretend this is a property that we're selling. If you're in here, come down here to the tax ID number and click on it and you get the tax assessment. The biggest reason that I do this is for that omitted property problem that I push on everything. This house actually had omitted property. That's why I bring it up. And when I first pulled this tax assessment, I don't have a copy of it in here. The first thing I noted was that it had a 1-bedroom. And the reason that I did it was that we went into the house. It's the same house I always talk about. It had the daylight basement. It was 5 years old. I went in the basement and I could tell that the finished work down there did not match upstairs. So I knew it had been done afterwards. So I went in and looked at the tax assessment. It said it was a 1-bedroom. The county didn't know about the downstairs being converted. So it's a red flag for omitted property. I actually called the county and said, this is what's down in the basement. How much are they going to be paying in additional property taxes? And it was $1,500 a year. So that's pretty significant. That's another $100, over $100 a month in a payment. This is my ex-husband's house and he opted to take the house anyway. And the taxes only went up $900. I think they're up to $3,900 now. But the old listing, which is in here, says that the taxes originally, trying to find it, were $3,200. So they didn't go up that much. Actually, $700, I guess. Didn't go up a ton, but omitted property is kind of a big one. Jump back over here to this one. You also want to make sure that the name matches on the tax assessment to who you are writing as the seller in the listing. Sometimes it's a little bit different. If it is different, ask the seller or the selling agent why that's different. Could be somebody passed away. Could be that someone maybe they bought the house before or after they got married. There's several different reasons. So you do need to know how you need to legally write it up. Obtain their information. I have a sheet that we're going to go over next also that is like a cheat sheet for a purchase agreement. So if you're in the home, if you fill the sheet out, it's everything that you're going to put on that purchase agreement. It'll help you with writing the offer later. You don't have to continue to use it, but as a new agent, it's kind of helpful to fill those things out. And you can build your own if you want to. Get their address, phone numbers, email, correct names, how they want their name on title, but don't put their personal information in the offer. You want to leave that part out. And I'll just touch on that right now. The reason why is you don't want their personal information being out for a seller to be able to get, or a selling agent, just to cover yourself that they're not going to get contacted. You do want to try to keep separation between the buyer and the seller not meeting. Sometimes they'll meet anyway, and you don't have control over that. We had one just recently where the buyer and seller decided, it wasn't one of my deals, but another one of our newer agents, the buyer and seller decided to negotiate the buyer moving into the house prior to, happened before any of the agents even knew, and it hadn't closed yet. That can be kind of a mess, so you want to keep them separate. The other reason would be I wrote an offer up in Vancouver a little while ago, and the seller was crazy and she didn't want to pay commissions. So after the whole thing back and forth, and both of us decided we would reduce our commissions, the seller decided, never mind, I'm not going to pay any commissions at all. I'm just going to call the buyer and sell it to them directly. But she couldn't because she didn't have their contact information. So she probably could have Googled them or found some other way to contact them, but it did kind of help stop that from happening. So that could be messy too. Yeah. There's some crazy people out there. You will get a crazy person at some point in your career. We all get them. It took me 20 years to get one, or I guess it was more like 18. Discuss how your offer is going to be written and signed. Most people are doing it digitally. So you're going to go home, fill this out, call me and say, I'm going to write my first offer. They'll never know I exist in the background. I'll help you write it. You'll look like you're not brand new. Once in a while, they want to do it in person and with wet signatures, but that's so rare, and you hardly ever do that. I do have a guy right now, actually Gordon, who is going to be wet signatures. He doesn't do internet. He's like a unicorn. He's a fun unicorn. Austin knows all about him. He's helping me with
I
him.
love that unicorn.
He's definitely a unicorn. He's really nice. But he doesn't have internet. He doesn't have email. He has a burner cell phone. So trying to get things to him digitally is not going to happen. We're going to have to go old school if we can ever get him in contract. Meet in person for wet signatures, electronically for email. Explain all your documents and contingencies. So when you send it off to them, just write an email out that says, please review, let me know if you have any questions, and sign if you understand it. That way you have something in writing saying you told them to read it, so that they don't come back on you saying, I signed this because I trusted you and it's not what I thought it was. They need to read it. I actually had somebody do that, not read it, and then try to tell me that I didn't explain things when I did explain things. So anyway, people do it. Yeah.
Everything is-
Yes. Track everything you do.
Yeah.
You really have to protect yourself. I don't know why anyone would ever try to sell a house without representation. Once you go through this class especially, you'll see that there's just so many things you can get sued for that you don't know, that we know on protecting people. So contact the listing agent. Like I said, advise that you're writing an offer on the agent's listing. Do that right away too, because you don't want to miss out on them taking another offer and not knowing about your offer coming in. That's pretty important. Do that immediately. Ask about the closing date that works best for the seller. Ask about rent backs. Do they need a rent back? Other offers, how many other offers? A timeline for response, also really important. A bank is going to take a lot longer. They could take a week to get back to you. Weyerhaeuser, if you're doing land, that could take weeks for them to get back to you. So you do need to know that. Most sellers are 24 hours, they'll get back to you, but some of them are a lot longer. Depends on the situation. Or any other information that's relevant to the potential sale. Contact the client's lender right away too. Let them know that you're writing an offer. You need a pre-approval letter. That pre-approval letter is going to be for the price that you're offering. So even if they're approved for 500, but they're only offering 425, you'll be getting a lot of different pre-approvals. We talked about that in the mastermind not long ago, that lenders are just, they know that they're going to be popping out several of those. So, discuss the closing date and timeline. Again, it's different on each type of loan. Ask if the closing costs need to be paid and how much. They will give you, you can't write the offer with a percentage of closing costs or even just saying seller will pay closing costs. You need to say prepaids. Make sure you say prepaids also. On a VA loan, there's non-allowables also. If you don't say those two things, then the seller only has to pay regular closing costs. We had an agent do this where she only wrote closing costs in and then she got to closing. And even though it said $7,000 of buyer's closing costs were a small portion of that. They were just maybe 3,000 of that. The rest of it were all prepaids. And because she didn't put the word prepaids in, the seller refused to pay them. And she took that out of her commission. So her commission was discounted by about $6,000. So that hurt pretty badly. You do need to have an actual amount in there. Also, you can't do a percentage. Ask and the lender can tell you what that is. They typically will go a little bit above. So if the closing costs are $6,900, they'll tell you $7,000. And then the seller's the one that benefits from that when they're not exactly. But better to go that direction than the other direction where your buyer would have to bring in more to closing and they're not prepared for it.
And where would you put that prepaid is the closing?
To be
Just
paid?
confirm
Yes,
that-
it's in the contract. There's a section.
Okay.
for it in the
Okay,
contract.
okay.
Yeah. And if we get enough time today, I'll go through those forms. I pulled them up. So I can kind of show you some of the, I won't go in detail. That's something that Kelly does in a class, but I will try to touch on those. I extended this class half an hour to try to make sure we could get through everything. So it's hard to do it all in an hour. Ask what type of loan they're doing. Nice. Submit the offer to the listing agent, and then you're going to be sitting around waiting. That's the hard part, is the waiting. Your buyers are on pins and needles, so that's just try to keep them calm. You can email it. You can physically deliver it if you want to too. That's how we used to do it. Now everything is done digitally, so email is fine. Typical documents that you're sending to the listing agent are the purchase and sale agreement, the pre-approval letter, proof of funds in the case of cash. Inspection addendum, if you use it, you don't have to. I don't use that addendum. I just mark it in the purchase agreement, and I'll show you that also. Other addendums that you may have might be a blank addendum, a septic, or a well, depending on the type of property that it is. Could be a the HOA addendum if there's an HOA. So there are a couple extra ones that you may have to send over, but these are the basics. And sit back and wait.
Is this when you would also send in like the appraisal addendum that was
If-
mentioned
yes,
today?
yeah.
That's what Kelly was creating.
Yeah, that's nice that he's doing that. He's putting a lot of verbiage out for us that is super helpful. He's actually putting something together for all of these little weird things that, because we're in such a crazy market right now, we're having to use all this verbiage so that you can just grab it and use it, which is really nice. Day 2. So hopefully you got your offer accepted on day 2. Could be longer. Or there's a counter offer. You might negotiate several counter offers. I've seen 6 counter offers go back and forth. It's kind of a pain. A lot of what we do with countering can be verbal, but be really careful with other agents. Feel them out. If you feel like the other agent is making decisions for their client, do everything in writing. Don't verbally negotiate anything with them because they're probably pushing their client around, and it's just better if you do everything in writing. But oftentimes we're doing a lot of things by verbally to try to cut down how many pieces of paper we're pushing back and forth. Receive your signed documents back from the listing agent. You're going to upload everything into Command and submit it for review. You're also going to send them anything that has to do with money, not inspections or disclosures, but anything with money is going to the lender and to the title company. So the first 2 things that you're going to do before you upload it to Command, unless you want to do Command first, but it would be better for you to send everything to the lender, everything to title, purchase agreement, anything that has to do with money goes to both of those. When you send it to title, that's called opening escrow. And it takes, usually if you send it there that day, it opens that day. I have seen it take 24 hours, but typically it's done the same day. So they potentially could take their earnest money down that day. If you get in contract, timelines all start the following day after you get in contract. So say you get in contract on a Monday, the first day is Tuesday for you, and everything is business days unless you otherwise state that it's regular calendar days. Items not necessary to go to the lender are the disclosed limited agency, multi-page disclosures, repair addendums, things like that. You really want to keep repair addendums away from the lender, especially unless they have money on them. But if they have money, separate them out. And we'll talk about that when you get into a deal. We'll write the repair addendum saying this, and this get fixed and we want a credit. And then you take a separate addendum and you put the credit on that, and that goes to the lender. And then the lender never knows about the repairs because it will muddy the waters. You know, that's kind of not totally above board. It's how we do things. Keep things a little more smooth. Yeah. Advise your clients to deliver earnest money to title. Don't do it for them. I have done it. I just actually did it for a client, but I highly advise not doing it, because if you don't get it to title on time and it goes past, usually it's 3 days when it's due. You can make it longer or shorter. That can actually, I probably should add that to this, because earnest money can be another good way to be more competitive. If they don't get it on time, so Monday you got in contract, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, by the close of escrow is when that earnest money is due to title. If they don't get it in on time, they are in default there. So the seller, if they want out of the contract, that's the first place they're going to look is, did they deposit earnest money on time? And if they didn't, they can cancel the contract and keep the earnest money. We did have somebody do that. I've talked about this. I'm sure these are all my same stories, which is good. We haven't had any new crazy ones, so that's a plus. But my stories get kind of boring over and over again. Anyway, we had a client or an agent in here a few years ago. It was a high-end house, a $900,000 house, which is quickly becoming not a high-end house. But at the time, that was a lot, it was 3 years ago, about roughly. $8,000 commission, and it was her kids that were buying the house. So mom said, I'll take earnest money down for you. Didn't get it in on time. Seller got offended somewhere in the transaction and wanted out of the transaction, found out earnest money wasn't in on time, kept the $8,000. So the agent had to pay her kids $8,000 because it was her fault. So it gets a little ugly. You could lose a client over that too if you don't get that in on time. Make them do it. Make sure that they understand why it has to get there on time so that they don't cancel. In the event they don't get it in on time, or they know they're not going to, you can do an addendum to extend that timeline out and bring it back into contract again. Doesn't mean that you are out of contract by not getting it in, but it does mean that you could potentially lose a sale on it. definitely want to get that fixed right away. Unless you're on the listing side and you know it's been done and you want that out for your seller, don't say anything. Open escrow happens when you send the file to the title company. They're going to order a prelim when they get there, and it takes a couple, when it gets in there, it takes a couple days to get that. You do want to read that prelim when you get it. I'll help you go over what it is. It's got lots of things in it that won't make sense to you the first time you look at it. Lots of links for easements and different things that pertain to the property. Basically, essentially, it's just making sure that there is nothing buyer, seller, or property wise that will keep the transaction from going through. And it's also insuring the property. So also make sure that the price that they're insuring the property for is the actual purchase price, because I've seen, that's the biggest thing I see different. It doesn't always match up, and you want to get them to fix that. Sometimes there are exceptions on the property too that need to be taken off. So it's pretty important to look at it and know what you're looking at. Title is handling all the transfer of money. They're the nice neutral third party. They're the one that you can count on the most in the transaction. They hardly ever make mistakes, but they do make mistakes. And ones that you cannot count on, I say this all the time too, and you'll totally understand what I mean when you get in contact with one of these people. The lender and the other agent are the two people that you can count on the least. So you're essentially the babysitter in the whole transaction. You're the center of it, making sure everybody is doing their job and they're doing it on time so that you can close on time. Because if for some reason the lender isn't doing their job, you get all the way to closing and you can't close on time because of that, and the seller wants out. If you can't close on time, they can leave the transaction and keep the earnest money. So don't you wonder why people would ever represent themselves in a transaction? Can get into so much trouble. Review the prelim, prepare and deliver a broker demand. So the broker demand does not go out until after you've negotiated repairs though. You can get it ready. I would put it in the file, have it ready, but the figures might change. Day 3, you're going to schedule inspections. Typically it's 10 business days to complete and negotiate the inspections. Make sure that you're not coming up on the end. So don't wait till the very last day to negotiate, because if you send your repair addendum over on the last day and it's not totally negotiated by 5 o'clock that day, that inspection contingency is gone and you may not be able to get any repairs done for your client. If it gets to that point, there are a couple things you can do prior to getting to that point. If you know you're going to go over, just get an addendum to extend that timeline. If you get all the way to the deadline and you can't get anybody to answer your questions or your responses, worst case, you can throw a termination agreement at them. So as soon as your buyer fills out a termination agreement and you deliver it, it's terminated right on. This is like a worst case, just save your client's bacon kind of thing. We hardly ever do it. It can be undone by a basic addendum, but you don't want your clients to get stuck with a house that they aren't going to get repairs on. So I did have one. I'm doing a for sale by owner right now. I represent the buyer, and the seller is super slow at getting us anything. So I took my chances on it. We ran over on that inspection addendum, and he told me they were agreeing to it, and I had it in the email saying that they had agreed to it. So I opted to not. I couldn't have gotten an extension out of him because I couldn't get him to sign anything. I'm still waiting on property disclosures on that. It can be really frustrating to deal with that, but I opted to let it expire. Try not to have that happen. I was more worried about throwing a termination at him than overdoing that timeline. Yeah. So gut feel is good on that. You can always come to us, and me or Kelly, and talk to us about what should you do in that situation. Notify the listing agent and schedule your inspections. So right out the gate, as soon as you are in contract, I have this in day 3, but really day 3 is really day 1 of the contract. Start scheduling your inspections right away. You could potentially schedule inspections prior to being in contract too, because that will speed it up. So if you are shortening your inspection period, you could schedule them ahead of time because you can always cancel them. So it's safe to do that. Attend 100% of your inspections, start to finish. Some companies are making you wait out in the car. Some of them are letting you be in the house. Most of them are not letting the buyer come into the house for the whole inspection, but talk to whoever the inspector is and they'll let you know whether or not they'll let you. Amerispec has been asking, they let us be in the house the whole time, but they're asking that the buyer come at the end. And then I have another guy, Eagle Eye, who says that, but he really doesn't care. When the buyer gets there, they can stay the whole time. But you are responsible for the house start to finish. So don't leave and go to the store and come back, because if the inspector falls off a ladder, you're going to be in trouble for not being there. So Hopefully I'm not scaring you. Seems overwhelming when we go through this, but it's really not. Once you've done your first 1 or 2 transactions are going to seem totally overwhelming because it's all brand new. You don't know what you're doing. Don't worry, because I'm essentially your transaction coordinator in the whole thing and helping you. You're never alone. And I will answer my phone if I'm awake. So even I literally have been on the phone with people at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. So don't be afraid. Don't feel like this is overwhelming. You're going to negotiate repairs. That usually goes pretty easily, but this is the do or die point in the transaction. This is where it is going to sail fail if it's going to sail fail, usually, because you can't always get people to cooperate. Sometimes buyers are totally unreasonable and sometimes sellers are. I don't know if Brian is on here because I can't see all the people in here, but he had some people with some crazy repair requests just recently that were absolutely insane. The list was so long. You are going to get those people. It happens. You can choose how you want to deal with that too, though. So it's, don't be afraid to, you don't want to tell them what to do. You do want them to make the decision themselves. And ultimately we have to take what they're telling us to do and go to the other side, which can be really embarrassing sometimes when they're ridiculous requests. But most agents know when you come to them with something ridiculous that they've had that client. They know that you're kind of tail between your legs and you have to represent your people. Once the repairs are negotiated, notify the lender to order the appraisal. This piece of it can change depending on the market. Right now it's safe because we don't have enough listings. We're not backed up on appraisals right now. So it's safe to wait until after, but if we're in a crazy market where they're backed up, then you may want to order the appraisal right up front. Do your inspections because by the time they call you, it's going to be after. But the reason for doing the appraisal after the inspection is to save them money. It's about $850 for an appraisal. And if it's going to die at the repair point, you don't want them to have to pay for both. Unless you're with Keller Mortgage, then it doesn't matter because they absorb the appraisal if it's fast, which is nice. Don't send the repair addendums to the lender unless they affect money, which we kind of talked about. Do send any price adjustments to the lender though. Inspect the repair. So when you write up the inspection addendum, this is really important to know. As soon as you have negotiated repairs, your contingency is gone. So if the repairs don't get done or they don't get done to the buyer's liking, you don't have a contingency to back out and get your earnest money back. You just have a buyer-seller issue at that point where they have to decide, the buyer has to decide, do I move forward, buy the house and fight about it later, or take on what didn't get done correctly and sue them later, not sue them later, or do I want to back out and lose my earnest money? That's the conversation you would have with them if it gets to that point. Do write into the repair addendum though, if they want to do a walkthrough prior to closing, that has to be written in there. Otherwise you don't get that option to be able to do that. Day 13 through closing, you're going to handle conditions, crisis issues. It seems like always you're sailing through, everything's going to be great. And then the last couple of days is when the issues come up. Sometimes they have to do with appraisals or could be anything. I just had one that I still get caught in it where I'm like, okay, it's going to close. Don't have anything to worry about. We're just waiting for funding. And my last one was they signed and then she wired her money incorrectly over to title. And they had to send the wire back, and then Bank of America, it was a big wire too, held it because it was over 100,000. They held it for 5 days. It held up closing. Even though we had signed, we had to wait a whole week for it to be able to close. So don't count your chickens before they hatch. Don't count your check before because it can get put off. That's the biggest rule of thumb in real estate. And it can die at any point. And it actually, even after it closes, potentially could. I've never seen it happen, but Mike has. So that's extremely rare. Communicate with the lender, be really communicative with them, especially in the last 2 weeks. You want updates and they don't always give you the updates when you want them. So check in with them a couple times a week, bug them. You want to make sure they're on top of things. Again, I have one right now up in Washington that the appraisal still has not happened yet. And he told me 2 weeks ago it had been ordered, it was going to get done. He told me it was done at one point. It still hasn't been done. It's just a drive-by. I don't know why. He's not telling me the truth. So this is what happens with lenders. It's why I tell you guys to make relationships with lenders so you know who you can trust and count on, because the ones you're inevitably going to be with lenders that you don't have a choice over and you don't know what you're getting. You might get a great one, you might get a horrible one. But we have to babysit them to make sure they're doing their job. Same with agents. You do want the CD. The CD is the biggest thing toward the end. So about 2 weeks before, a week and a half, I have a closing next week on Friday, 2 of them actually. I'm already bugging the lender on, do you have the CD yet? Because the last possible date to get the CD is Tuesday to be able to close on time, but really it's Monday. We need to have it on Monday. So Monday's the first date, even if they open it up at, the buyer opens it at 11:59 on Monday, Monday counts. So you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday docs can be drawn. The reason I said Tuesday is worst case, if you have a really good lender who can same day fund, you'll have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they draw docs Friday morning, sign them Friday morning, close same day, but it's so hard to do that. So that's you really have to keep after them for the CD. And this will be the thing you forget when you get in the transaction, but I'll remind you. So, ask when docs are anticipated. The title company will not make a appointment for your people to sign until they have docs in hand, but you can ask your buyers, what's the best time for you to sign, what time of day? And that way you can go to the title company and say, this is the best time of day, just FYI. I know docs aren't there, they won't. Some of them get kind of catty about it too. I'm not gonna make an appointment until I have them, because they may not come, and they know that, and they don't wanna make appointments that never come to be, so. Also, about a week ahead of time, talk to the listing agent about getting keys and entry to the home so that the listing agent's not on vacation when it happens, and then you never get keys until they get back. I've had that happen. Normally what happens with keys is listing agent leaves the main key in the box, and then the homeowner leaves everything else in the house. And then the buyer's agent can come once it closes, pick up the keys, hand it to their buyer, and the listing agent comes back and gets the box off later. That's normal, but it's different for everybody. Buyers receiving the CD, so that's great. 3 days review, I went over all of that. Normally your buyers sign and the seller signs at least 24 to 48 hours prior to closing. Most of the time it's 24. You can do a same day, like I said. And then closing day, a few things happen throughout the day. They release funds first, so you'll get that notification from title first, and then around 2 o'clock it will actually record. So you have funding and recording that happens. So if you get the message from title first that yay, we funded, that doesn't mean it closed. And it can fund and then not close that day. So it just depends. If it doesn't close by 2 o'clock in Oregon, it won't close that day. They go, that's when the courthouse closes that section down. So it won't close. If you're in Washington, they digitally record. So it could be 4:59. And I've had that happen before. I sat up in Washington all day one day because I didn't want, it was Thanksgiving Eve or Christmas Eve. I can't remember which, but I stayed up there. Traffic was horrible. And I told my husband at 4 o'clock, I decided to head back home. I live in Damascus, and I knew as soon as I got on the off ramp to go to Damascus, that's when they would call me. And literally 4:59 on the off ramp was when they called me. So I had to drive back up to Northwest Portland to give my buyer the keys. And I picked up my husband. Anyway, it was a big, huge thing because they can go all the way up to 4:59, which is good and bad. You cannot give your keys to your people until it's recorded. Careful with that. Sometimes you can get the keys ahead of time, but there's that trust that the listing agent's trusting you to not give the keys out in time. Title notifies you. If they don't notify you, call them, because sometimes some title companies are just not very good about communicating it. Usually they are. And then some other notes are prepare and submit your commission to opportunity. That commission is just like a broker demand. So at the same time, really the office wants that. I still have green sheet on there. I need to take that off. We don't have green sheets anymore. We have what's called commissions. It's the same kind of thing, but much easier. They really want that done when you first get into contract so that they can see what's coming up. It's really important right now if you have any closings coming up in the next 2 weeks, if you have any closings coming up next week, get that commission done next week, because Heather's out of town and she's setting up, she's going off of that commission sheet to know what closings are next week. So she'll have them already. You won't get paid otherwise next week because she is on vacation. Submit all your documents to command as they come in. You only have 72 hours from the time something is signed to get it in for Kelly to review. And then he has 72 hours to review it. If a document's incomplete and isn't going to receive additional signatures, then put it in there. Sometimes you write an offer and you never get a response on it. It times out and it's dead. Just send it to him for review. If you are on the buy or the sell side and you get 15 or 20 offers, you do have to submit all of those for review. And I know agents aren't doing it. I was the reviewing broker for several years, and they know to do it, but they don't do it. So, and the only way that I would find out is if I saw a double end, or I knew, like, my new agents wrote one of 20 offers, so I knew that it had multiple offers. So that's it on this one. I'm going to jump over to zip forms, which logged me out. Actually, let me show you the selling agent timeline, or the purchase agreement. Let me back up one more. So this purchase agreement is the form that's the cheat sheet that you can take with you to when you're with a client, when you're showing property. You can also just use it to write on. However you want to use it, you can use it. It would be not a bad idea to come up with a selling agent timeline. Get this to go smaller.
Can we have a copy of this right here? This
Yes,
timeline? That'd be awesome. Thanks.
I can send anything to you digitally. I can get it to go smaller. See if I can make it smaller now. Nope, I'm making it bigger. I don't have this down. One of these makes it smaller up here. You can kind of see what it is. It's just a basic timeline. You can send this to your people in the transaction so they can see what's being done, but it's also good for you to be able to see when things were signed. These are all the documents that could potentially be in here. I have a few different versions of this. And also the time frame that things are typically due is on here. It may not be what's on your deal, and the actual due date. And then there
You should
is,
be able to go to view. up top.
oh yes, oh, it's right here.
Or-
Let's go down,
Yeah.
probably more than that, maybe 50. Oops, this mouse is not working very well. So that's the whole part, the whole thing. Again, you can make your own versions of these, and I do have a couple different versions, but it's nice to keep track of your timeline. I have this task list too. Let's get that one to be a little bit smaller. This is all of the forms that for each different type of sale. The yellow means it's the basic set that you're going to use right off the bat. And then the rest don't all apply. Some of them apply, some don't, depends on the type of transaction. Best I can send you to. I do have these packets with all of this in it too, if you'd rather have the packet. RMLS, which we went into, this is the listing. You do have to upload this listing to command also. There's a print button up here in a PDF. There's a weird thing with RMLS right now. The first one you can print. After that, it won't let you print them if you get stuck. I know, at least for the printers here and mine at home. But so make a PDF of it and then it will print it. That's the workaround on that. When you get stuck on that, if you forget, you can always call me. Zip forms. So these are the forms. I made a template in here, which I typically do with all of you guys in the beginning. This is what we didn't get to do, but we'll do it next week or when you write your first sale. So it's got a basic sale and a basic listing, and it has all the forms in it. So I'm going to actually go through a couple of the forms. Residential sale agreement. What time is it right now? Oh, we have lots of time. So if you have a template, it will automatically fill out your information up here. So you're just pulling the template over and you have it. And then there is an MLS Connect button. It's not in this one, but if you were in a transaction, there would be an MLS Connect button. I think it's right in here. And then that will bring all the information for the listing in. So you have hardly anything to fill out. It's really nice. You do have to name your sale agreement. You get to name it. You can do MLS number. That's kind of a good one. You get to name it whatever. What that's doing is just filling out every form and connecting all the forms together. So that's why it doesn't really matter what it is. It's just something that you create for it. Biggest boxes I see people miss are 7 and 12, the representation. Buyer exclusively usually, and then the seller will be here. If you have a for sale by owner, you'll write in here FSBO. And then later in the contract, just say all parties or acknowledge that the seller is not represented or represents themselves, something like that. Make sure your license numbers are in here for the other agent and yours. The buyer's name would go in here, seller's name, county. You don't need the whole legal address anymore, but you do need the R number, the tax ID, and it sits right here. But if you've imported from RMLS, it's going to import everything for you. Purchase amount. So if you were 500,000 is what they're offering, that would go here. If you're doing an escalation and it's escalating up to 550, still 500 here, and the escalation will go up to 550. That's separate. Earnest money is here. There are 2 spots for earnest money, first and a second. Rarely do you ever use C though. That's only if there is a second earnest money being deposited for some reason. In the case of land or removal of inspections or something like that, you might have a second one that goes in there. These all count, they do the math for you. So if it's $80,000 you're putting down, 5,000 earnest money, 5,000 goes here, 75 goes in D, and then E fills in automatically for you. Make sure you check deed. Contract means that the seller is holding the note, so you're almost always checking deed. It's going to be super rare that you ever do contract. And then we'll go down here. Fixtures are anything that the seller wants to keep that's attached. So it could be bushes outside, flowers, things like that that are in the ground, or a light fixture that they want to keep, things like that that are considered attached. Some things that are considered attached or not considered attached are the TV, the thing that attaches to the wall that holds the TV, that's supposed to stay. I see people take it, but note it. If your buyer wants to keep it, make sure you write it in, because sellers oftentimes think it belongs to the TV when really it belongs to the house. So it's kind of a weird one. Ring devices are another one where you think it's attached, but really it's a personal item because it's feeding to your phone and it's personal, but it is attached to the home. So typically they don't stay, but it's gray area. So write it in. Hot tubs also, you think they're attached, but they're not attached. I know it's really confusing to think about all these things that are not attached and attached. Sheds are another big one. If it's on a foundation, it's supposed to stay, it's considered attached. If it's not, it's supposed to stay, but it's the biggest thing that I see agents over and above washer and dryer. That's another one that they fight over. Write it in there if it's a shed and they want to keep it, dog runs, things like that. If ever it's in question, write it in here that it's staying or going. Personal property would be those things that you want to stay. So make sure you note those. Be really specific too. We had some agents in here squabble over a washer and dryer. $300 set. You could buy it all day long on Craigslist. And neither of the listing or buyer's agent would just chip in and buy the buyer a new one. They fought over it and it became a huge thing. I feel like just buy your people that make them happy. You're making a $6,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 commission. $300 is not worth fighting and getting all the parties upset. So, but don't do gray area. The reason that happened was the agent put on there all appliances as seen on this date, and then he noted a couple of them, but not all of them. And then the listing said washer and dryer, but the listing agent was saying, well, you didn't write it in there, so it doesn't stay. And he was saying, no, I did, because I said all appliances as seen on. It was a big deal. Write it in, and then you don't have that problem. Also, if you get to, I had this happen. I like to always talk about the scary things. Listing of mine, they wrote in here they wanted the refrigerator. We did a walkthrough right before closing where the buyer and seller were actually there and the agents were there. And the buyer said, I don't need the refrigerator, to my seller because I bought a new one. So go ahead and take it. So he took it with him. He moved off to Terrebonne, and then the buyers moved in and their refrigerator was on back order. So now suddenly they want the refrigerator. They said that verbally that they didn't need. So he said he'd bring it back. I never updated it. I should have gone in and done an addendum and put it in writing. I trusted them to go by their word. And unfortunately, that's not good to do. So I went down to Standard TV and Appliance and bought a replacement refrigerator. It was only a $300 refrigerator, and I delivered it, and that made everybody happy. So it's worth it to do that sometimes. So down here in the financing area, you have balance of purchase price. This top part is going to be if they're pulling funds from something that's not liquid, 401k, sale of a home, things like that, you would write that in here. If it's cash, you'll click this. You'll have other in the case of private money, and then just write in here that it's private money. A lot of this stuff, again, don't worry if this is all going too fast and you're not remembering. I'm going to walk you through this on your first up to 6 offers. You have me for 6 offers. Or 6 in contracts, because you might write 15 or 20 offers. But
Yes, absolutely.
in this market, you might, for sure. Balance of purchase price, make sure you check line 71, and then you choose the type of loan it's going to be. Other would be USDA or some of the grant programs that are out there. Pre-approval, this one's been coming up. If you're on a weekend and you can't get a hold of a lender, then write on here the date that you're going to submit the pre-approval, and know that in this competitive market without a pre-approval, you're less odds of getting approved. So it's really important to be really diligent about getting that prior to heading into the weekend. Financing contingencies, home to sell, whatever other weird things you want to put in there. This is all going over representation, insurance, flood insurance, all the things that your buyer will do in the background. Seller carried transaction, which probably won't apply. Closing costs. This is where your closing costs will fit if you are asking your seller to pay them. So it will be worded seller to pay up to $7,000 of buyer's closing costs and prepaids. Or in the event of a VA loan, seller to pay up to $7,000 of buyer's closing costs, prepaids, and non-allowables. There's 3 words for that. If you have a VA loan, ask your people if they are at all disabled, because you'd be surprised how many veterans have claimed some kind of a disability, and they can get around some of the fees on a purchase in that case, some of their closing costs. This is the licensed professional inspections, check line 177. Unless you want to add the form, there is a form for inspections where you get to check each type of different thing. I don't use it. I kind of feel like it's over the top, but Mike loved it and promoted it. It's up to you on how you want to do your business. I usually check 177 and then I write in invasive inspections, radon, sewer, and any other inspections deemed necessary by a home inspector. You may have invasive things are sewer, they're actually going in the sewer line. Sometimes they're pulling a toilet to get in there. Radon is invasive because you have to keep the house closed up for 2 full days. And if it's hot outside and there's no AC, it's going to get really hot in that house. So it's considered invasive. Water or oil tanks, invasive also. You're doing some digging sometimes to do soil samples. So you may want to put that on here, and then just other foundation issues, things like that might come up. So that's why I kind of leave that vague. I think that Kelly prefers it not being so vague, but I like it leaving that window open to have that approval ahead of time. If you make sure that any testing that you're ever doing, even beyond the first inspection, even if it's vacant, that you're scheduling it with the listing agent so that they know when you're going in and out of the house. You don't really have free reign. Here's another section I see not checked. Most people forget this section. These are the same, more or less. This is kind of saying what the listing is, that no, there's not a private well, not a septic. And this is also saying that the seller is representing the same thing. So when I was reviewing, as long as this part was checked, I wouldn't kick it back if this was the only thing that wasn't checked, but still better to check everything. And I know that Kelly would prefer that every single box in here is filled out, even if it does have a default timeline. He still would like it if you would write in that timeline on there. Scroll down. Miscellaneous items are townhouse or townhome plan community. So it might have an HOA, might be just a regular neighborhood. You do want to click yes if there's an HOA in it. Alarm system, smart home, just check all these boxes. Home warranty. This one, you can check it and say either buyer or seller are going to pay for it. In a better market, I really highly push asking the seller to pay for it. Right now, I wouldn't because it's too competitive out there, but I always recommend you don't have to do it. It's your business, run it however you want to. I always buy my buyers these home warranties because they always use them. Something always breaks and then you kind of look like a hero. I didn't do it on my last transaction, and because he's a friend of mine and I gave him a big gift. So instead of, I won't say what it is because I know I'm being taped. So recorded. I'll tell you off the record though. Anyway, his water heater went out right away. So we spent I dragged my husband up there twice, once to fix it and then it still went bad. So we bought a new one and our friend doesn't know how to, he's not handy. My husband's handy. So my husband spent 3 hours installing it for him. Should have bought a home warranty when we wouldn't have had to go up there, but I gave him another gift. I couldn't leave him hanging, but it's every time they close, they use it. So it's a nice feature. You can write it off if you're making it part of your package for what you do for buyers and sellers. So with write-offs, if you're giving a gift, you can only write off $25 per person. So if it's a family of 4, you could do $100 on your gift. You can spend more on it, but you can only write off $25 per person. I know, but on a home warranty, because it's the cost of you doing business, it's part of your package, you can write off the whole thing. So keep that in mind with write-offs. Additional provision. Oh, go ahead.
Chantel, I was just going to ask if I didn't put that in my initial contract, and now I'm thinking as a buyer's agent, I want to buy that for my buyer.
You can do it anytime. Pay for it.
Okay.
So you could set it up now through whatever company. First American has the best rates, I think.
Okay.
You can set it up
And
now or even after closing if you want. You can pay for it directly or you can have it taken out at closing.
okay, but do I have to write that in this contract somehow?
Not if you're going to pay for it, you don't. You can just do it for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's-
Chantel, as far as the gifts go, you said $25 per person in the house. Is that those people have to be on the title, or how does that
Good
work?
question. We had an IRS guy come through here, not an IRS guy, but a tax accountant who said that the state and the government will push back on that because they want it to only be the people that are on the offer. But this accountant has pushed back and said, no, it's a family of 4 and they bought this house because it works for their entire family. And he was able to push back and get that. So I say you can push back. If they say, no, you wrote off too much on this, you say it's a family of 4. They bought this house and they'll give in.
Thank you.
I'm not an accountant also, we say that. Talk to your accountant about that, whether they're willing to go to bat on that too. Additional provisions, anything outside the box that's going to be different, you would write in here, seller rent back for free, anything. This is kind of a nice little section for anything that's going to be different. You can also do it on an addendum when it gets to be too much, and you would just write the addendum right in here. Escrow, typically on a listing, let's see if I still have that up here. They have oh no, it's not going to come up because it forgot. Let me come back over here again. Anyway, the title or the listing agent usually has one that they want to use. It's not set in stone. You can push back on that. If your clients are already in escrow somewhere else, you can put in your own and negotiate it. The listing agents get kind of pushy on this and they want to go with their people, but it's not, you don't have to. You can negotiate that. I usually just go with whatever they say on here. Prorations, another area that gets missed. So one way to not miss boxes would be to start at the top and tab down all the way. And then you're not missing anything because it stops on everything and you have to answer the question. But if you're not going to do that, just make sure you go back through because these are the things that people miss. Prorations are almost always on the closing date, unless there's some kind of a long rent back, then you might want to do entitled to possession, possibly. And then this part will auto fill out your earnest money will go here. This is 3 days unless you do otherwise. If you have an out-of-state client, you may want to up that. But if you're wanting to be more competitive, you may want to keep it at 3 or less. And it goes directly to escrow unless you are with some kind of like new construction. Sometimes they take the earnest money and they keep it with their company once in a while, but they're usually using their own forms in those cases too. So jump down here, closing date, you put that in here after you've negotiated it. This part, possession, 5 o'clock on closing. It's going to record at 2 o'clock, but the contract says 5 o'clock. If you want occupancy right when it closes, put it somewhere. Additional provisions would work because they don't really give you a spot in here. They always say 5 o'clock. It gives the seller a little bit extra time to get out after it closes. Or you rent back, change in this section. I'll jump through. Another spot, really easy to miss because it's falling in the middle of 2 pages where you're not filling anything out. But levy of additional property taxes, if it's deferred, you would say that it is specially assessed. Deferrals happen out in other areas, typically more than in town. In town, the only deferrals you'll really see are probably elderly or VA, but you can see it in the taxes. If the taxes are unusually low, it's probably specially assessed in some way. And it will also reflect in the listing. It does tell you that in the listing. This is the deed or contract. So the reason it's here and also up at the top, who the buyers are, sometimes the buyers are different than how they want the deed. They might want to put it in a trust. You would put the name of the trust here. That's what that is. And then your expiration date for your offer goes in here. Any questions on offers? No? Okay, we'll jump to another form. Disclose limited agency. This is required for every single client you ever have to sign. Even though it goes over dual agency and you may not be in dual agency, we have to explain what it is so that people understand. Kelly could be in dual agency when you guys are not. Everybody just went through school, so it's probably super fresh for you how that whole, the diagram where they have how everybody represents everyone. There could be 2 agents from our office. One represents seller, one represents buyer. So you're not in dual agency directly, but Kelly is. And if you do this on a listing, Some listing agents don't want dual agency at all. They don't want two people from the same office in here, only seen it one time. But it does happen where they won't sign this. So if you do have somebody who refuses to sign this, just note on it, won't sign. But at least you've shown it to them and you have proof that you've signed, that they've seen it. Upload that. Oh, back up. Multiple information disclosure. This is a good one. This has lots of information on it. And I usually just go topic by topic, the agency disclosure pamphlet, which is that one that was drilled into your head that you have to give to everyone on first contact, which normal agents don't do that. We do it when we're at the offer. I didn't say that out loud. Buyer advisory, they can go here to get it. When they get this as a paper, it's not going to be a link that they could click on. This is actually not a link either, surprisingly. Smoke alarms detectors goes over what the rules are for that. Carbon monoxide also. Water intrusion and mold is a really big deal in Oregon. Almost every house has mold in the attic, especially the 90s houses. Radon. Radon, I really push people to do radon. It's $150 for the inspection. It's well worth it. I kind of used to think, oh, it's just another thing that they've come up with for us to have to spend more money for inspections. But I have a friend up in Vancouver that 2 years ago was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life, but grew up in Colorado, which is a highly red state for radon, in a basement. They had her bedrooms in the basement. So she's younger than I am. She's, I think, well, she might be 40 now. They have a little girl. Anyway, she was told she was going to die. So I said to my husband, I think they should test for radon. I bet you that there's radon in that house. So they did, and it came back as an 11, and 4 is the cutoff for being dangerous. So they put a mitigation system in their house. And a year ago, she went back to the doctor and the cancer's gone. So it's the only thing I can attribute it to. And now I really push the radon. For $150, it's worth it. And then the mitigation system can save your life, I think. I'm sold on it. Wood stove and wood burning fireplaces. This pertains to an actual wood stove. They usually stand alone. Sometimes they can be an insert. A fireplace is not a wood stove. But a wood stove is a true, you actually put wood in it, has a flue that comes out in it. If it's not DEQ certified, they're making you dispose of them. So there's some ways around that I can tell you about. You get in that situation because buyers sometimes want to keep them. So, but don't get caught doing something you shouldn't do. CMA home evaluation, if you want to do those, it talks about what those are. Your mortgage disclosure, which is the CD that I talked about in the 3 days. Home warranty, we just talked about. Square footage is just an estimate, and so they are more than welcome to hire a boundary assessor or surveyor or measure. Full home inspection, recommended to do that. I know right now that people are starting to say, I won't do a home inspection, I'll take the home as is. Don't let them do that. If they can ask for no repairs, but don't leave your contingency so they can't get out of it, because it could have $100,000 foundation issue. And if you $1,000 to find out all of these things and then be able to back out is totally worth it. You'll still be competitive and be able to win the offer by saying, I won't ask for any repairs, but if you leave them that out, you're saving them potentially a lot of money. Personal excluded property, we talked about. Underground storage tank. Older homes have these, so older than the early 70s was really probably the latest that you'd see an underground storage tank. And we do a sweep for it. Sometimes you can't see it if they buried there's a little thing that sticks out of the ground that you can see where they fill it. You have that. If they're not decommissioned, they could be leaking. So there's a lot of tests around that you want to do. Decommissioning can entail 2 things. Either they remove the entire tank or they just leave it and fill it with sand if it's not leaking. HOA and CC&Rs. Omitted property. This is the one that I talked about. That's kind of a big one to go over with your clients and then get stuck with that. Your FERPTA, which is a foreign person. This is kind of less of a big deal, I think, than it is still a big deal, though. The title is verifying that the buyers and sellers are not foreign, especially a seller. If they are foreign, they leave the country before they pay their 15% in taxes. The government does not care who pays them. They're going to go after whoever they can find, and that's going to be your buyer if the seller has already left the country. So we talked about that one yesterday. Home warranty, you can get a home warranty for a listing for free. Most companies will do that. Wire fraud, also we've talked about, I think, one thing I didn't talk about, my other scare tactic that I used, which happened in this office a few years ago. It's why I always tell people, if you're ever going to wire, make sure you know who you're wiring to, verify the number, verify who you're going to. A couple years ago, we had this nice family that were selling their first ever home, and they had I want to say it was $112,000. They're moving from one house to the other 2 weeks before Christmas. It was on the news. 2 little kids. And they got wiring instructions because there's hackers behind all of our emails, behind us, title company, lenders. They can see everything that we're doing. We can't see them, but they can see us. So they know everything to the name and the penny. And so they send over what looks like legitimate wiring instructions. This homeowner sent his $112,000 off, and then title called him a couple days later and said, okay, we're ready for your wire. And he said, I already did it. And they were like, oh no, God, that money's gone forever. You will never be able to trace it. You will never get it back. So make sure you know who you're wiring to. And I have that, I tell people that when I go over this, tell your buyers about it. And then they just sign it. That's that one. I did ask Austin to put on the books some new classes, hopefully with title companies on Wednesdays. One will be omitted property, one FERPTA, and one urban growth boundaries. Those would be good to go to. The pamphlet is here, wire fraud is here, your broker demand. Let's look at that really quick. This will get done about 2 weeks prior to closing. It automatically fills in this part. There's one for a buy side, one for a sell side. They're geared a little bit different. You really could use either one for either if you wanted to. You could make them work, but this one is for a buyer. You're just going to put in your title company, your parties, their side information, and then down here in compensation, it says or, but really we want the dollar amount of what your compensation is actually going to be. So you'll do the figuring. If it's 2.5%, it's a $400,000 listing, it's 10,000 that you're putting in that. Put the dollar amount. What they're doing, what title wants to see is that yours matches the listing agent. And then you send this to Kelly for signature and send it to title, and then also put the uploaded or the version uploaded into command. And this is how your instructions for title to pay you. And on the other one, you are noting that the title company is paying the brokerage, not you directly. So the check will be made out to the brokerage. The principal in the transaction on the other form is the seller. That's who's actually paying the commission. So the seller pays title, and title pays each of the brokerages, and then the brokerages pay their agents. Go down here, the escalation addendum. If I can get it to come up, there we go. So pretty simple addendum, just goes over the escalation. If it were a $400,000 house and they're doing 3,000 increments, you would put 3,000 in this section, and then their max amount down here. And this final worksheet is worked out. If they choose your offer, then the listing agent will fill this in for you. I'm going to jump over to some ideas in this competitive market on ideas to make your offer a little more competitive. Does anybody have questions right now on anything I just went over so far? Yeah. Everybody's ready to write offers? Is that awesome? So my ideas would be an escalation clause. Ask the agent ahead of time, will they accept them? Because if you write it and then they won't accept it, you're going to have to revise your offer. Any revision on an offer that you've sent over can just be done on a blank addendum. You don't have to rewrite the entire offer. You can do a shortened inspection period. A lot of these I've already talked about. No repairs under specific dollar amount. This one, we only talked about no repairs, but you can do something that says maybe buyer will not ask for any repairs under a singular amount of 500 or 1,000 or a cumulative amount of whatever amount. Just talk to your people about what they're comfortable with taking on themselves and whether they want it to be singular or cumulative. Do a love letter. Be careful if you're on the list side of this, but I have seen these win offers. I actually am in contract because of a love letter. Yeah, it makes a difference. Sometimes you have a buyer that there's not a lot of love to spread, or that they're more. I have an agent right now that I'm helping that wrote one for just a single guy that is very analytical, and so that can be kind of hard. But the love letter could be, you could still do it and then present that he's extremely well qualified and he really likes the property, and you can plead their case also. So they're good. I've used them a lot and they've won. Appraisal gap coverage, that can be helpful, or appraisal waiver. These are kind of the same thing, but a little bit different. That would be worded that in the event of a low appraisal, and Kelly has great wording for this. He likes to mention the section of the purchase agreement that you're referring to, and then also say, in the event of a low appraisal, buyer will bring up to $15,000 to cover the gap. So that helps if they don't have a lot of cash to be able to bring extra in, that's when that will come into play. Or you could say the entire amount, which would be an appraisal waiver, or you could just word it that the appraisal waiver, or that the appraisal is being waived. That works too. But that means that if it doesn't appraise, that the buyer still has to buy it, or if they can't buy it, they're not getting their earnest money back. So that's the out.
Right. And on that one, Chantel, that's if you've got a lender, I mean, it's up to the lender, right, to decide that. You can't just say, oh yeah, I'm waiving the appraisal, and then the lender's.
You could, but you're not
Say-
protecting your client at all. You're taking something away from them as an out. So you're just taking you're taking your financing contingency away by doing that. I don't like the waiver at all. I like the gap coverage, even if you're saying the entire amount, because you're spelling out what they're actually going to do versus taking a piece of the contract out, which is what you would be doing that way. But I hadn't heard the other way. I don't know how lenders feel about the waiver being taken or saying waived. You could do it. It's just, I think the coverage is the better way to go, and say specific or entire amount.
Chantel, so normally that amount that like the appraisal gap is that the buyer is going to make up for, that just normally goes towards the full price of the home. But I was a little confused because on Kelly's addendum today, that one was saying it goes towards the down payment.
It does. It's really confusing because when you think about, well, they're putting 20% down, so their loan amount is going to be $300,000 and appraised at $385,000. So how come they can't still get it? Well, it's because the lender is saying that the house is worth $400,000. They're willing to only lend up to the amount that you're paying or that they're lending for. And then, so you kind of have to take out whatever their down payment is and throw it out the window in your brain, act like it's not even there. The lender is only willing to lend up to the appraised value. So anything over and above that, the buyer has to pay that difference. It's like buying an upside down car. The lender's not going to lend on it. Well, some of them will, but for these purposes, a lender doesn't want to pay the extra on an upside down car. They don't want to take on that negative thing. So the buyer has to be willing to bring in their 20% and also the difference.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that makes sense.
I created a spreadsheet for my current buyers for one, so I could understand this concept, but I also did it with their numbers and the different amounts that we would have to come up with, including, their 20% down. And it just made it so much easier. And on this last house we won, in part, my clients wanted to come in even higher on their offer, but at that higher amount, they would not have had enough cash to offer an appraisal gap at all. So I put together different scenarios, and if appraisal comes in at this amount, what's the risk to the seller, because the seller wants to eliminate the risk that you'll back out or that they'll get less money. And I showed my buyer how it was actually a far better offer to come in lower but have cash for the appraisal gap.
Mm-hmm.
And we got the house. So it's interesting, but putting it in a spreadsheet really helps your buyers and yourself to know, especially when you're in a rush last minute trying to make an offer on a house and it's, panic time and you got to get it out there. Having that done was super helpful. So we're more than happy to share that with people.
That's a great idea. It's hard to explain to buyers sometimes what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Especially when you're looking at, well, what should we offer? And you're trying to guess what the appraisal might come in at. I did this whole range and it just clearly showed where the sweet spot was for what to offer on the house.
Nice. Hey, good.
Mm-hmm.
Rent back for the sellers is also a good option. Ask them if they need some extra time to be in the house, because they sometimes will pick that offer just to have that extra leeway. Free rent backs are great unless they go too long, then the buyer's ending up paying for them living there. So a few weeks for free is fine. I have seen 2-month free rent backs. That's kind of crazy to ask a buyer to do because they're paying their way essentially, but it's a competitive market. So I've seen all kinds of things. Ask the agent what's most important to the sellers too. So before you write the offer, call them and just say, hey, what does your seller want? What's going to be most appealing to them? Sometimes it's price, sometimes it's somebody that is going to take care of the home. There's all kinds of reasons why they might pick you. Ask the agent what will make your offer the best offer to. So they can't really tell you prices. Some of them will though, and there's questions that you can ask to try to find this out. So be courteous when you're asking the questions so that you're not pushing too hard. But I've had some agents who say, I'm not going to tell you anything because they're not supposed to tell you anything. And others who, if I ask questions like, well, if we offer this, will we get it? And she would say yes or no. So we did that all the way up to, she was sitting actually at the table with her sellers, and I was texting her saying, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And we got it because I kept in communication with her. And so also keep in communication. Be the last offer in too. Don't give your position away too soon. This is a big one for me. I always try to be the last one in. It requires a lot of communication with the listing agent though, so that they don't go review offers prior to you getting yours in. But if you get yours in and then you have a chatty agent, they're going to give away your position to another person. So that's why I like to be the last one in. Keep a good rapport with the listing agent, even if you don't like them, still keep a good rapport with them because they have a lot of pull with their clients. So sometimes you can win an offer because the listing agent likes you better. Keep good communication, like I was just saying, before and after you submit the offer. So you can see, well, did other offers come in? Do we need to change our offer? How do we look in the mix with them? Because if you have a buyer who is more flexible, you can go back to them and say, okay, you're not the best. Do you want to do anything about that? Let them make their own decision on it. Don't push them into going higher, but at least you've given them the opportunity to be able to up their offer more or make it a little sweeter. And make sure the listing agent knows how qualified your buyer is. They could even call the lender. And in some cases, I know Academy will call the listing agent for you and tell them how great your buyer is. Be easy to work with. So those are some keys. Anybody else have any ideas that they have seen that have won offers for them so far? I got rid of all of our pictures, so I'm not even sure who's in here with us right now. And I can't remember how to get it to come back up.
I don't know how much it helps, but you know, when Mark Fox presented at the last Ignite, his buyer agent there said, you know, she writes the offer summary as well that looks really nice and easy to put the key highlights in, so you're sure they see it. Of course, you know, listing agent's going to review everything, but actually in this case, again, I did the offer summary, and right up front, you know, first line item is purchase price, and then in parentheses I put with appraisal gap coverage up to, you know, to $15,000. And then when the agent responded just asking me a question, she said, well, I don't see that in their offer. It was there, but she just missed it. But because I had put it in that offer summary, it was clear that it was there and she knew to look for it. Had it not been there, apparently she didn't see it in my, you know, sale agreement. So, you know, it definitely made the difference, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons we got it. So it's just a quick, you know, hey, here's what the summary looks like, no closing costs, no warranty, you know, whatever it is. So it helps them digest it fast. I think it might have helped in this case. And then also when I send over everything to the listing agent, in addition to the love letter, I wrote my own sort of love letter for my clients too, like how qualified they are, how much they love the home. I just kind of reiterated all of that too. So
Perfect.
hopefully it worked. So, you know, it seems to have finally worked for us.
That was your third
time out.
for them?
This is the fifth one, the fifth house we made an offer on.
It's rough. And it's not a
3 months of looking.
Wow, that's good to know. That's good to add that to my list. I think that's everything I have for today. If anybody wants help with anything or has questions after, feel free to reach out to me too. And hopefully you'll all be writing offers soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.